Hey everyone, today we're talking about taxation without representation. Remember from last week we talked about Britain's debt problems and the fact that they won a war, they won the French and Indian War, but had great cost to it. The cost of the war, they borrowed a lot of money because of that, and plus they gained all these new territories. Our old map on the left, our new map on the right, where they have all the land east of the Mississippi River, plus Canada, that they have to protect now. So they have to spend money to protect that, send troops over, figure out what's there. So that's a lot of new debt that's going to come in. So, how are they going to pay for all this debt is the big problem. So, Parliament develops a plan. And the first part of this plan was to draw a line. So, with the proclamation line of 1763, they take a look at all this territory that they had just acquired from their victory in the French and Indian War. They tell the colonists, you cannot cross this line into the new territory because of the fact that you'll probably get into a fight with the Native Americans and we'll have to come and protect you and spend money to send troops over. And we don't want to do that. So they say to the colonists, stay behind this line. If you go past this line, you're going at your own risk. If you end up in a fight, you are going to fight it alone. So this was an opportunity for the British to say we're going to save money by not doing something. The second solution that they had was the Sugar Act. Now, the Sugar Act would raise taxes on valuable sugar and molasses, and this was used by colonists, especially in New England, to make products like rum and other products. So it was valuable to them, sugar and molasses. And if you're going to raise taxes on these, this is going to affect a lot of businesses in especially New England. Officials were seizing goods without due process. And why they would seize goods is if the tax was not paid, they would take the sugar, they would take the molasses, and they would not give it back to you. So businesses were losing their merchandise if they weren't paying this tax. And some businesses were paying the tax, but this fact that there was no due process. Due process is this idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. And what the courts in the colonies were doing, what these British courts were doing, was taking a look at these businesses, taking a look at the colonists and saying you're guilty until you're proven innocent, which went against what the normal British courts would do. So they were really cracking down on this act, on this tax, unlike the Navigation Acts that we talked about last week, where the colonists broke the rule and the British kind of looked the other way. They didn't send in reinforcements. Here, they were sending in the reinforcements. They were applying this law. They were seizing any merchandise if it was not paid. So, and then putting people on trial if they were accused of violating the Sugar Act. So, the colonists were not happy about that. And the Stamp Act comes around next. So, another debt solution here, an opportunity for the British to gain more money. And again, they're trying to collect the money from the colonists because the colonists are the ones that are being protected. This money was going towards the military that was stationed in the colonies. So, the Stamp Act was a tax on all paper goods. So, this included newspapers, posters, wills, mortgages, diplomas, and playing cards. This was the first direct tax on colonists. In other words, the colonists had to pay for this out of their own pocket when they bought paper products. This would be considered something like a sales tax that we pay today. If you buy a candy bar, you have to pay a little bit of sales tax on it at the grocery store. So this tax, it wasn't a major tax. It wasn't affecting a lot of people in a major way, but it was more that people were upset that they weren't being represented in Parliament, and Parliament was making these decisions to tax the colonists. So they were upset about this. And even though they weren't losing a lot of money off of it, they protested. And the example that we see here of the political cartoon with the skull and bones on it. That's just showing the amount of disgust that the colonists had towards this new tax. Another one was the Townshend Acts. Now, if they weren't getting taxed enough on sugar, molasses, and paper goods, now they're getting taxed on common everyday products like glass, lead, paint, and tea. And this Townshend Act that was passed by Parliament allowed tax collectors to search for smuggled goods. And why they were had to search for smuggled goods is colonists were trying to get around these taxes. So they would smuggle goods like paper products like sugar and molasses and now these everyday products into the colonies and try to avoid paying that tax. So now tax collectors could go and if you have to search for something nowadays, you need a warrant, you need just cause, we call it. And these tax collectors didn't need any of that. If they suspected that you were smuggling goods, they would go into your factory, they would go onto the ships, they would go to where these colonists, they suspected that they had these goods, and they would search and tear things up. And this is where colonists were almost at a breaking point. Violators who were found to be smuggling goods in faced a very harsh trial in front of a British judge, and usually they did not get off free. So they would face jail time, they would face very large fines. So they would face a very harsh trial in which they didn't have much of a chance of winning. So American reaction, we talked about some of the American reaction to these different taxes. First, they just ignored the tax. So kind of like the Navigation Acts, they just ignored it and kept on doing what they did. But unfortunately for them, this didn't work very well because the British were enforcing these taxes, and this affected a number of individuals and businesses. They would smuggle products into the colonies. Again, this got to the point where the British allowed tax collectors, allowed the military to search ships, to search factories, to search buildings where they believed that smuggled products were without much of a reason other than they just suspected it. This was where you have the cry out from colonists, no taxation without representation. They weren't against taxes necessarily. They were against the idea that they were being taxed without any representatives in parliament deciding for them. So, no taxation without representation became a common cry from the colonists. They also decided to boycott all British goods. Now, to boycott something means that you're not going to buy it. So they decided we're not buying British goods. If they're going to be mean to us, we're going to be mean to their businesses too. So we're not going to buy their goods. They're not going to make a profit off of us. So they boycotted British goods. And then finally, they started to form secret groups. So one of the major groups that we're going to be discussing as time goes on here up to the revolution is the Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty would write letters to the editor in newspapers across the colonies. They'd spread messages, they'd spread posters, and they were really looking at organizing the colonies as one. So we talked about the Albany Plan of Union, how it failed to get the colonies together. Sons of Liberty were attempting to get the colonies back together, to join as one instead of 13 separate groups. And this would allow them to fight better against the British, not necessarily disengage or separate from Britain. But this was an opportunity for them to maybe get representation, but it was an opportunity for them to fight back against what they felt was wrong. So that's the end of this presentation. Take a look at the quiz on this page. You can rewind, you can fast forward through this video again to find answers. Turn in and submit once you are done. Thank you very